Behind me really is what you would call the first prototype of global government. So you have the flags from many nations, you have the dignitaries coming in their limousines, but the primary purpose for the foundation of the United Nations in 1945 in San Francisco, it was formed for the primary purpose of global government. So when you see the United Nations, think global government, because that's exactly what it is. Now, I talk about this in detail in my book, The Day the Dollar Died. And what you have to understand is that the United Nations, this land behind me, was purchased by the Rockefeller family. And the Rockefellers founded the Council on Foreign Relations. The United Nations was founded in 1945 in San Francisco. The Rockefeller fortune purchased this land for the United Nations. Why? Rockefeller did this because Rockefeller is a globalist and an internationalist, and the purpose of the UN is global government. Now, yesterday we were up in Westchester, New York State, and we were walking on the approximately 4,000 to 7,000 acre compound and land that the Rockefellers own, going way back to John D. Rockefeller Sr. And there are a number of very large mansions on the Rockefeller compound, and they that's partly where they rule the world. Now, up on 68th Street, and we're going to be going there later, we're going to be visiting the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations says that they're a think tank. And just a think tank. Well, I challenge you to visit their website. You can find a link to it through my website, McGuire.com, and you read their material for yourself, and you decide whether or not you think the Council on Foreign Relations is simply just a think tank. Every presidential, New York City at its finest, every presidential administration going back to 1945 and in the past was dominated by Council on Foreign Relations members, the Secretary of Defense, the President, the Vice President, and numerous media people, and numerous senators, and members of the State Department are all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. So if the Council on Foreign Relations is just a think tank, why does it have a control over our administrations? Now, going back to the United Nations, everything that you're seeing in our world today is not occurring through random chance or random conflicts. There's a plan behind it. I was speaking with somebody who was an investment banker here in Manhattan just the other day. By the way, you can get articles on my research by visiting my website, McGuire.com. But everything that you see happening in our world today is being, a great deal of it is being orchestrated by the Council on Foreign Relations and the United Nations. Again, the purpose of the UN is global government. So the purpose of all the meetings, the idea is to reduce the national sovereignty of the United States, to weaken the US dollar. That's why I wrote my book, The Day the Dollar Died. Because when you reduce the national sovereignty of the United States, when you destroy the independent sovereign nation state, which is what is happening all over the world today, and you weaken the US dollar, and you weaken the US militarily, you equalize the playing field on a global level. Added to that, you need multiple justifications for global government. So the United Nations is the organization that is going to solve global warming, even though a consensus of scientists have come out recently and said that there is no global warming, that in actuality we are in an era of global cooling, but they're going to fight global warming nevertheless. The United Nations is very active in making Israel a two-state solution. And wanting to internationalize Jerusalem. The United Nations is very active in devaluing the dollar because the plan of the UN and the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Federal Reserve, because the same men who founded the Federal Reserve, the international bankers, were the men and families that founded the United Nations. They want to weaken the US dollar for the purpose of creating a global currency. So, the goal of the United Nations is to use these series of what are called manufactured crises. I think it was Hillary Clinton the other day, but actually Rockefeller said it first, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we're going to fight the swine flu epidemic, and the UN will be a key player in that. We're going to fight the catastrophe of global warming, and the UN will be our savior in that. Ultimately, the United Nations is global government made by man, absent from God. The first prototype of global government was the Tower of Babel, or Babel, where Nimrod was the ruler. And God came down and judged that global government because in the hearts of those men, they wanted to be like God. Now, the thing we have to remember is that this institution is going to create a world government with a brand new world currency, with a brand new world constitution, with a UN tax and a UN military force, and they are going to create a new constitution, but it's going to be a global government absent Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace. Many of you have probably seen that famous poster of Jesus knocking on the building of the UN and being ignored. And he is ignored. In the center of the UN behind me, and I have pictures for you to look at, is a meditation room, because the United Nations and its founders are very, very spiritual. In fact, there was an organization called Lucifer Publishing that was located on this property a number of years ago. And Lucifer Publishing published the teachings of Alice Bailey and other occultists who channeled spirit guides preparing the world for global government. Now, the problem is that that became very unpopular. So they changed the name from Lucifer Publishing to Lucius Publishing, and they've moved it off-site of the United Nations. Many of the key members of the United Nations are deeply involved in the occult, not all of them, but their goal is a one world government without God. And this, I believe, is what Daniel was referring to in Daniel chapter 9 as the fourth beast, in conjunction with the European Union. And this is what I believe the Apostle John was referring to in Revelation 13 when he talked about a world leader, the Antichrist, a global government, and a false prophet bringing about a one world economic system. In some way, shape, or form, this institution, probably in conjunction with the European Union and other groups, will create what the Bible calls a one world government. I'm Paul McGuire. Go to paulmcguire.com. This is Paul McGuire, and we're in Manhattan. Behind me is the Council on Foreign Relations building, which I talked a great deal about in my book, The Day the Dollar Died. We've been standing out here for just a few moments, and I'm somewhat reluctant to discuss the people that just walked into the building and the level of power they hold in the U.S. government and the world. In fact, for the sake of decorum, I will not name their names, but you would know who they are. Some of the most powerful men in the financial and political world just walked through those doors. Many people believe that the White House is the capital of the United States, or at least that our government is run from Washington, D.C. I'll put forth the thesis to you that the building behind me is really the power center for the United States of America and for much of the world, the Council on Foreign Relations. This institution sprung forth from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, a number of years ago. It was funded largely by Rockefeller. And the primary purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is global government, one world government. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations claims to be merely a think tank. Well, you know, every presidential administration, if you look at a who's who of who's running our government, they're all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Even some very well-known ministers are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. The question really here is who's running America? Now, across the street is the Americas building, and it's interesting to see the posters and the other things talking about implying the unification of North America and South America, or Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So behind me is the largest power center in the world, the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and it is in my opinion that they control our foreign policy. They control a great deal of our domestic policy. Yes, they claim to be a think tank, but essentially our government follows their policies. Who are some famous Council on Foreign Relations members? Just about every president of the United States, every Secretary of State, every Secretary of Defense, and so on are members of the CFR. The Bush family, the CFR. So our foreign policy and the direction of our America, is it really coming from you, we the people, or is it coming from this powerful elite? And if I discussed who just walked through the building, this powerful elite who control our world. And here's a question that I want to ask you, for those of you that may be skeptical about this. Given the prominence and power of the people who are members of this organization and the people that stand inside that building, if they're just a think tank, how come they're always here? What are they thinking about? In my book, The Day the Dollar Died, I talk about a Council on Foreign Relations computer simulated rehearsal for a global financial meltdown that was held right here behind me in the year 2000. I'm Paul McGuire. Go to my website, paulmcguire.com. Paul McGuire once again, and we're standing in front of the Council on Foreign Relations building. The Council on Foreign Relations was established primarily by the Rockefeller family. We were walking around the Rockefeller family compound, they call it, where John D. Rockefeller Sr. built his luxurious mansion, and they own something like 4,000 to 7,000 acres along the Hudson River. Now, many Rockefeller billionaires also have mansions there. What's the connection between the Rockefeller fortune and the CFR? Well, Rockefeller purchased the land for the United States. Also funded the Council on Foreign Relations. Members like Henry Kissinger, President Carter, Republican Richard Nixon. In fact, in order to further his political career, Richard M. Nixon, former President of the United States, had an apartment not too far from this building. Even though he pretended to be a conservative, he had an apartment not too far from this building. And Rockefeller also had, at that time, an apartment not too far from this building. Interestingly enough, Richard Nixon mysteriously becomes President of the United States of America after his connection with the CFR, or Council on Foreign Relations. Now, a moment ago, I saw two of the world's most powerful people walk through those doors. And we've only been standing here 10 minutes. I would venture to stay if I was standing here for hours, just this day alone. The magnitude, the power, and the wealth of the men and women who walk through that door would stun you. My question to you, and I detail this in great detail in my book, The Day the Dollar Died, is who is really running the United States of America? Is it we the people? Or is it a alliance between the international bankers, many of them are funding the Council on Foreign Relations, Federal Reserve, and the Council on Foreign Relations? The Federal Reserve controls both political parties. The Council on Foreign Relations sets the agenda politically, socially, economically for both political parties. So whether you're voting for a Republican candidate, you're getting a CFR Council on Foreign Relations man or woman. Or if you're voting for a Democratic candidate, you're getting a CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, men or women. Now, if that's the case, and this so-called think tank, which probably has a couple of hundred key leaders, the very top leaders of the presidential administrations in it, the Council on Foreign Relations controls the agenda of the United States of America as a think tank. Now, they would deny that. They say they're simply giving recommendations. They give some pretty heavy-duty recommendations. Let me give you one. Building a North American Union, or North American community. I talk about it in my book, Are You Ready? Obama has just come out in full support of the North American community, or the North American Union. They've just changed the name, but he came out in full support of it. In fact, he's having a major meeting concerning the North American Union in the next week or so. And there, he's going to talk about the unification of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. It used to be called the Security Prosperity Partnership. They changed the name to that. And now, and it has a new name, but this is a Council on Foreign Relations project. On the Council on Foreign Relations website, which you can link to on my website, McGuire.com, you can read for yourself, if you're skeptical, their 59-page report called Building a North American Community, or you can read about it in my book, The Day the Dollar Died, and Are You Ready? They say quite openly and unabashedly that their goal, their game plan, is to make the U.S., Canada, and Mexico a single unit, a North American Union, and in the words of Robert Pastor, who was like the director for the Council on Foreign Relations for the North American Union Project, or excuse me, North American Community Project, he said it was going to be a mirror of the European Union. Now, why is that important to you and I? This group, the Council on Foreign Relations, is proposing, listen very carefully, and I didn't mention the name of the men who walked through the building for a number of reasons. What they are proposing is a new North American Union Constitution. That means get rid of the U.S. Constitution and replace it with a North American Union Constitution. The North American Union Constitution, which is a replica of the European Union Constitution. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that your basic constitutional rights, such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, are gone. Just look at Germany, what the German government, under the auspices of the European Union, has been doing to the German people. Now, is this a think tank? Creating a North American Union? Proposing that we get rid of our current U.S. Constitution and replace it with a North American Union Constitution? Is this just a think tank? Well, I think you can figure out what it's really all about. Now, obviously, I'm under surveillance here with the camera in front of the CR building. I would imagine invisibly it is being monitored by dozens of television cameras and security officials all over the place, because this is one of the major power centers in the world. Why am I able to do this? Why am I still able to write The Day the Dollar Died and talk about this openly on television, on the internet? Why can I do this? I can do this because currently, at least for now, I, as an American citizen, have constitutional rights of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and so on. I want to see those rights preserved. I don't have a problem with a full disclosure of your plans for unification if it's in the best interest for all Americans. And if it is in the best interest of all Americans, why deny it? Judicial Watch filed under the Freedom of Information Act a release of 2,000 pages about the North American Union. And a lot of it had to do with internal memos of the Secretary of State. Now, I heard the Secretary of State at that time, Robert Gutierrez, denied the existence on television of the North American Union. Yet I read all kinds of internal memos, not from him, but in the State Department, that alluded to its existence. So we have a conflict. The Council on Foreign Relations is funded by Rockefeller money. The United Nations was funded by Rockefeller money. The goal of the United Nations is one world government. The goal of the Council on Foreign Relations is one world government. The current economic financial crisis, and one of the gentlemen that just walked through the doors, let's just put it this way, he has controlled the world's money supply, or at least a large part of it. The current financial crisis is not an accident, it's an engineered crisis. I'm Paul McGuire. Go to my website, paulmcguire.com, and you can read more about this in my book, The Day the Dollar Died. I'm Paul McGuire. Manhattan, New York. Behind me is the Council on Foreign Relations building. And the Council on Foreign Relations was founded by Rockefeller with Rockefeller money, as was the United Nations. The Council on Foreign Relations, one of the most powerful, they call themselves think tanks in the world. In fact, much of the foreign policy of the United States of America and other groups is controlled or influenced, let us say, by the Council on Foreign Relations. Many of the people who work at the Council on Foreign Relations, many people who are members of the Council on Foreign Relations, I'm convinced really don't understand the complete agenda that it proposes. And that agenda is globalism, and it interfaces with the United Nations. And their goal is a one world currency. That's why I wrote my book, The Day the Dollar Died. A one world currency, a one world economic system, and one world government. The Council on Foreign Relations believes that that is the solution to all of mankind's problems. Now, at first passing glance, that seems like a noble aspiration. However, the problem is that in this new one world government, which will be based on humanistic principles, you will no longer have freedom of religion. Your speech will be controlled. You will not be able to talk like I'm talking now. You will lose free speech. You won't be able to criticize the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know why. It's supposedly an independent think tank. And see, these are dangerous freedoms to lose as Americans. Our founding fathers, Jefferson and George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, they lived so that you could have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press, basic freedoms that make America different than any other nation in the world. But if the agenda, in my opinion, of the Council on Foreign Relations is completed, and it's well on its way of being completed, both political parties are controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, both Democrat and Republican. America will decline as a nation, and that is happening now. It's being done deliberately. You devalue the dollar first. I talk about the agenda in my book, The Day the Dollar Died. You devalue the dollar first, so you equalize the playing field, but the goal is a world currency. That's what's happening right now. We're seeing the transition from America as an independent sovereign nation state into some kind of global government. Perhaps first a regional global government, like the North American Union. And then, after world currency and a one world economic system, a global government. The men that go into this building, some of them, are some of the most powerful men in the world. And they are controlling the United States of America. Again, I'm not going to mention the name of the individual who walked through the door, two individuals a couple of moments ago, but let's just say power would be an understatement for what they have. They have power and money that transcends the human imagination. Those individuals were the most powerful people in the world, some of the most powerful people in the world. And so the Council on Foreign Relations is far more than a think tank. It is setting forth its agenda, the globalist agenda, an agenda of one world government. The question is, why are the people in America not informed about it? Notice that this organization is hardly ever discussed in any corporate-controlled media. Why? It's one of the most powerful institutions in the nation, like the Federal Reserve. But the average American, the average person in any foreign nation, knows almost zero about it. So therefore, the media blackout on it makes it conspicuous by its absence. If it's just a think tank, if the Council on Foreign Relations is just nothing, then why the conspiracy of silence? It's precisely the fact that you, or most of you, know nothing about it, or your friends know nothing about it, is the prime indicator that it is a very powerful organization. Because the members of it are the presidents and the secretaries of state and defense and banking and industry and media. Go to my website, paulmcguire.com. and get a copy of my book, The Day the Dollar Died, or Are You Ready?, where I talk about the role of the Council on Foreign Relations. Or go to the website, paulmcguire.com, and get free information. My question to you as I stand here in Manhattan, New York, obviously security surveillance all over the place, is this. Is an unelected, privately funded institution like the Council on Foreign Relations, which sets forth our foreign policy, is that really part of the American system? Is that the voice of we the people? Or is that the voice of an elite that rule our nation and will eventually rule the world? I think the most honest and fair thing is to come out in the open and say who you are, what your real goals are. And they do say that, by the way, on their website. So you really can't call it a conspiracy. They talk quite openly about it. It's just that most Americans don't read that information. You can be informed and know why they exist and what their purpose is. I'm Paul McGuire.